The deep sea, a place that has terrified and amazed people since our beginnings. The vast expanse of the deep is equally mesmerizing and terrifying. If you ask someone how they feel about swimming in large bodies of water, you'll often get one of two answers. The first answer is their absolute love for it. Some people relate floating in the deep as similar to floating in an infinite space, or floating between the lines of consciousness, somewhere between life and death. It is that unfamiliar expanse in which we cannot fathom to understand, and yet it can feel so familiar. Yet, there are many others that are absolutely terrified of it. The unknown space of the deep, combined with the creatures that lurk below, can be absolutely frightening. We've only discovered around 20% of the deep, and the percentage of creatures that we have discovered there is even less. There is a term known as thalassophobia, which is an intense fear of large and deep bodies of water, like oceans, seas, and lakes. This intense deep void is so strong and powerful that in order to control it, we must submit to it. For example, in order to scuba dive successfully, you need to have the ability to control your thoughts, feelings, breathing, anxiety, and fears. But what if, during that process, something begins to call to you? Something deep in the ocean. There have been divers that have experienced this phenomena, and it has been coined as the call of the deep. Let's talk about it. Imagine diving in deep water, and suddenly something beckons you to swim downward. That something is so strong and alluring that any survival instinct disappears as you go into the abyss. So this is pretty much what the call of the deep is. It is the instinct that some divers and swimmers have to swim downwards, never to return. This can also cause divers to lose their sense of direction, believing that the bottom of the ocean is the top. There are divers that have lost their lives in this way. Some divers who have felt the call of the deep have said that there is a feeling of calmness and peace in the deep water, almost like being in an infinite space, in which divers want to go further into. The idea of going further and further into the abyss is absolutely terrifying, and I can't imagine what those final moments would feel like. The origins of the discussion of this phenomena come from 4chan, but it's been discussed elsewhere as well, including by divers and people who have been in open water, and countless people have said that they have felt this feeling when in open and deep water. When looking into this immediately reminded me of a concept called the call of the void. When you are standing on a balcony or at the edge of a cliff, you may have had a sudden thought come out of the blue. What if I just jumped right now? Or if you've been driving and thought, why don't I just drive into oncoming traffic? You may have never had thoughts like these before, and you've never wanted to ever do something like that. And this thought may have just happened in the flash of a moment. These thoughts are actually pretty common, and it's often referred to as the call of the void. There have been a few studies done on this, but the answers as to why this exists often vary. For some reason, people have this instinct that kicks in, even if it's just for a moment. The thought that there's nothing physically stopping them from taking the leap, or even just slightly turning the wheel left, can absolutely terrify people, especially in the moment. Some think it's more prevalent in people who are struggling with their mental health, and others think it could be a misinterpreted safety signal, such as the brain encouraging them to get away from this potentially dangerous situation by giving them that impulse. It could be because of curiosity of what would happen or how it would feel, or it's just a fleeting intrusive thought, but many have experienced it. So could the call of the deep be associated with this? Despite the fact that many have gone through the call of the void, thankfully most don't ever act on it, while the call of the deep seems to be some other type of beckoning into the darkness. I think these two concepts are very similar, but I think there's a key difference because there seems to be some divers actually acting upon the call of the deep. And even though the situation of being on top of a building or in the deep would both invoke this fear, divers that fall victim seem to embrace the call of the deep rather than ignore or distance themselves from the action. Before we move on to the next theory, let's hear about this account from Reddit. So one Reddit user said the following: "A diving instructor took his students to a class in the ocean. The idea was to get them adjusted to not being able to see the sea floor, as that's something that sometimes happens. This particular instructor felt something was wrong with one of his students, and when he looked at him, the student was staring down and then began swimming deeper. The instructor tried to stop him at first, grabbing his shoulder before he could move too far, but the student shook him off and kept swimming down. The teacher swam after him and grabbed his leg. The student turned back to the teacher, smiled, shook off his leg, and continued swimming. Eventually, the instructor had to leave him down there because otherwise he would have risked his own life. Supposedly, this is something that happens to diving instructors often." So the question is the voice we hear from the call of the deep our own, or is it something else entirely? Let's move on to the next theory, as this might not be exactly it. The main explanation or theory for this is nitrogen narcosis, which is when the gases at a certain pressure when diving create an altered state of consciousness, almost like being intoxicated or drunk. Nitrogen narcosis is known by many different terms. This includes narcs, the martini effect, and the ominous rapture of the deep. This condition affects divers when they descend to significant depths, typically beyond 100 feet. It happens because the air divers are breathing from their tanks contains nitrogen, and when the pressure underwater increases, it affects how the nitrogen behaves in the bloodstream, ultimately affecting the central nervous system. This can create symptoms that are similar to being drunk or under the influence. This includes poor judgment, disorientation, memory loss, and difficulty concentrating. Some can also experience hyperfocus or even hallucinations. When severe, it can cause unconsciousness, coma, or even death. These symptoms are typically cured once the diver returns to shallower water. Nitrogen narcosis can increase if you are fatigued, have consumed alcohol, and struggle with anxiety or cold temperatures. Since nitrogen narcosis occurs underwater, you can only really be diagnosed by your fellow divers or partners with you under the water, who are supposed to be constantly checking in with you. The only cure is slowly going back up into shallower water. Nitrogen narcosis can definitely lead to some dangerous situations, especially if disoriented divers venture deeper rather than ascending. You can't even rapidly ascend if you run into this issue, because it could cause decompression sickness, also known as the bends, with symptoms like joint pain, difficulty breathing, and neurological issues. And so if you start feeling the effects of nitrogen narcosis, survival isn't always the case. So one Reddit user said the following: I heard of a guy who'd get nervous when he was narked and want to go to the surface, but he'd always think he had to go around the world to get back up and swim deeper. Another Reddit user also discussed this phenomena. My mom was friends with a guy who was a professional diver. He was diving an unexplored trench with a whole crew, trying to see how deep they could go. When they shone a flashlight on him, they noticed his mask was off, and one of the other guys tried to put it back on him, but he resisted help and started swimming down. The other guys thought he had nitrogen narcosis and removed his mask because of that. But last they saw him, he was grinning and swimming down without his mask on. Always gives me the creeps to think about. He was never found. Still makes my mom sad to talk about. She said he was a really great guy. So could the call of the deep be caused from nitrogen narcosis? The fact that people fight off their partners and continue swimming down is absolutely terrifying. Also, this is the second Reddit account of someone smiling before heading down, and I can't imagine how uncanny and terrifying that would be to witness. There are so many mysteries about this sea that we don't know, and we continue to be guests in a part of a world that isn't ours. Curiosity could also be a factor in this. When you're in open water, there is a natural inclination to see what's deeper, whether it's looking down a few feet or diving as far as you can until you need to come back up. There is just something mesmerizing about the ocean, but it's equally terrifying as well. Whether the call of the deep is due to nitrogen narcosis or something else, it is an absolutely horrifying concept and part of the greater mystery of the deep. Now, these are both very interesting theories, and so I wanted to introduce a third. When looking at unfamiliar and lesser-known concepts like these, I try to look back on history to see if there was anything similar. Now, scuba diving in its current form started in the late 1800s, although people have been freediving for much, much longer than that. And so it's a bit tough to go back centuries and see anything similar. Or can we? Has there ever been anything in history, or even folklore, that has beckoned people to venture into the deep, never to be seen again? Well, yes, there is. Mermaids and siren folklore has been a part of countless civilizations on almost every continent on Earth throughout history, and talking about mermaids is an incredible deep dive on its own. But one idea is pretty common. These mermaids or sirens will call out, sing to, or lure people to follow them into the water before taking them into the deep. Now, the idea of mermaids is both fascinating and highly unlikely, at least in the way that mythology and folklore have described them. I'm not here to convince you on the existence of mermaids, as that's not the point of this video. But with the amount of mythology surrounding sailors and men willingly going to their deaths in the deep, like something is beckoning them, doesn't that sound kind of familiar? There are people that have naturally been drawn to the sea, even when they're not in it. Could that have been a way to explain or even rationalize the call of the deep? Even if you don't believe in the existence of mermaids, there have been countless cases of people losing themselves at sea or being drawn to something which may have been the origin of the folklore. Folklore has always been a fascinating part of the passing down of knowledge from our ancestors, and it's an amazing way to hear stories of our past. But these stories have often been focused on warning our ancestors to avoid certain dangers, and comparing the luring nature of the sea to a mythological beauty of the deep could definitely be something that was done to protect our ancestors. The fear of the sea and what can cause people to lose their minds on it has been around longer than you think. Now, is the call of the deep an actual legitimate thing? Well, in my opinion, I would actually have to say yes. The simplest answer would be a scientific or medical reason for this phenomenon, like nitrogen narcosis, unless if mermaids are actually beckoning us in the dark, which is a way more fascinating but terrifying option. But with the amount of people that have felt this phenomenon, as well as similar feelings felt in other situations like the call of the void, my assumption is that there is more to the call of the deep than we know. But what do I know? There isn't a ton of information out there on this, and so if you've ever experienced something like this, or you know somebody that has, please share in the comments below. Even to this day, many of us have a fascination with the sea. Going to the beach is a common pastime, and oceanfront properties are significantly more expensive than anything else inland. Island getaways and all-inclusive vacations are incredibly popular, and these often include relaxing or swimming right in the sea. For many, the sea is a source of relaxation, of comfort and calmness, of inspiration, and of freedom. Whether it's lounging with a nice book on the beach or diving into the deepest depths possible, many share their love of water. Now, I'm not saying this is only because of the call of the deep, but humans' natural affinity to water has always been a part of our history. And so who knows? If this love of the sea can go too far, if our search for freedom can extend past our limits, if we really delve into the deepest depths of our psyche, there may be a deeper meaning to our obsession with the deep. We may get this call to freedom, to darkness, to the deep. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, please like, comment, and subscribe. I have some pretty big projects coming up on this channel, so please click that notification bell to stay tuned. I really appreciate each and every one of you. I've received a ton of support, and honestly, I've really been enjoying making these videos, and there's a lot more coming soon. I'm still working on trying to make my videos better each day, and I promise I'll give it my best. Thank you so much again, and as always, never stop wondering.